So, Greg, welcome to Colombia. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Thanks. Great to be in Colombia.
Okay, so why did you decide to come to Colombia?
Well, we've been doing work with our team here for a couple of years, actually. In the pandemic, we trained a group in the Think Wrong methodology. They were sitting around looking for something to do, and we had time. And from that was a partnership was born. And so we now have a team of about 14 people working on Solve Next, and we've developed together a strategy for bringing the Solve Next methodologies to underserved innovation markets around the world. Okay. So we're doing that in Colombia.
But why Colombia?
Well, I mean, it's really a like all great things, just a coincidence.
Okay.
So Danny Baritica, who's one of our leaders, was here. He reached out to me. He'd gone through our training in 2016. He was as part of a nonprofit that he was leading. Really thought that there was great potential and that Colombia needed to build some of its innovation skills and capacity, that the talent was ready, but needed more training and more tools and more skills.
Forward.
Yeah, to push forward. So he invited me to start doing that. I'm very interested in markets that are overlooked, right? That for various reasons. And so I think Colombia is one that has great potential, very entrepreneurial, highly educated, highly motivated, but lacking access to resources. And so there's an opportunity to actually bring resources into Colombia.
Okay, so this lack of access, it's all around Latin America, and it's a big problem, not just to develop technology, not just to innovate, and as well to make businesses. Yeah. How can we beat that? How can we defeat it?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways that we want to think about that. In terms of access, we're looking at, through our partnership, how do we partner with people who live in the country, right? Who speak the language, who understand the culture, and live within the economy. So I think a big part of access is, a gringo from Sillicon Valley doesn't speak Spanish, right? Doesn't really fully understand the culture. I admire it and I like it, but I don't live in it. And I don't live in the economy. And to say a medium or small enterprise or an entrepreneur should be paying for my mortgage in Silicon Valley is crazy. So I think these are some ways that we can improve access. And then I think there's some systematic things we can do and start to teach people frameworks for how do we start to build systems of innovation that can sit next to the performance systems that we already have in our corporations and in our governments and other places. How do we build a framework that can actually allow us to be disciplined and take a managed approach to creativity and to new things, just like we do to how we operate the things that already exist.
Okay, but what happens, because a big problem of innovation during the last 5 years was that huge startups like WeWork, like Green, different ones, they lied to us. They said something that they weren't, just to have a big IPO. And what's happening with this? Because we're promoting innovation, but we're not promoting the values above that.
Yeah, I think this is sort of a bit of the traumatic experience that we've had with the gold rush of, hey, there's a lot of VC money being spent out there, and I can get some of that, right? And I'm going to get as much of it as I can. So we can see things, like you said, like WeWork or, Elizabeth Holmes. There's lots of cautionary tales about what happens when people sort of greedily pursue these things and fake the data in order to try to get more.
Even the idea.
So, for us, I think in Colombia, venture capital is not freely flowing, right? It's not there. So what we need to look at is what are the other forms of capital that we can take advantage of? Okay. What's the intellectual capital, the creative capital of the country? Where can we deploy the human capital and the energy that's here? Can we get political capital behind doing this? Can we get the government to incentivize that? There are a lot of places that you can start to do that. But I think, like so many things in life, it needs to come from an authentic place and needs to operate on top of a platform where you're of values. I like the fact that you use the word values, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of this behavior that we've seen there. You wouldn't want your kids behaving like that, right? Right? And so why should we be operating like that? And so I think that there's an opportunity to do this in a way which is both aligned with a vision and values and purpose that are about driving positive change in the world authentically, not, sort of selling smoke and mirrors to get people excited about that.
I know, but something that it has been happening is sometimes the innovation process of different companies. I'm going to mention a few. Uber, I love this. So Uber or Green or different ones, they're above the law. Or sometimes we think innovation has to be above the law, and we don't care what happens in terms of our economy, how we are displacing things, or how we're making things wrong. Yeah. Innovation should be or has to be always above the law, or we can do it in a proper way.
Well, I think it's interesting. So I totally get what you're saying about being above the law, that people have that attitude. And it's been cultivated in Silicon Valley, this idea of we're pirates. It's like Steve Jobs raised the flag in front of Apple, early on, saying with the Jolly Roger pirate flag and saying, we're operating like these outlaws. We're going to do this. And that mythology has been cultivated. I think innovation, really great innovation, is usually in front of the law. Right, which is the law is trying to catch up to it because they're doing something new. There aren't regulations, there aren't laws for something new, right? So the law is going to have to catch up to that. But you ought to be doing that in partnership with compliance people, with regulators, with policymakers,
with partners, even with your competition.
Absolutely, yeah. Because you want to lift the industry, right? I mean, if you've got something unique and the industry's lifted, you're going to be still above it, right? And so if you can lift the industry, I think that's powerful. But I think this notion of the laws don't apply to us is coming from a extreme position of privilege, right? And I don't. That's not how the majority of the world works, and the majority of the world doesn't have that kind of privilege.
But that's the story that we're telling to the entrepreneurs as well, no?
Well,
or kind of. What do you think about it?
I think this mythology is cultivated, right? The people who are enjoying the benefits of it want to keep the myth going, right? And that's so when we look at innovation, it's not this sort of, there's a saying about rain dancers, a rain dancer, somebody who dances and makes it rain. Okay. So there's a Native American tradition of rain dancing, like we're in a drought, so you get a rain.
The people dance a lot.
Yeah. So it rains a lot. But the idea of a rain dancer is we're in a drought. You get the medicine man or the shaman to come out and do a dance, and then it rains. Well, in Silicon Valley, rain dancing is just all about knowing when it's going to rain and then dancing before that happens, right? Okay. So it's kind of it's a bit of a fraud, right? It's like, oh wow, look, I made it rain. I think that it's in the interest of those people to cultivate this myth that they're special somehow, they're unique. Innovation can be systematized. It's not sort of like you have to be Picasso to do it, right? You can define who are the people, what are the roles, what are the skills, what are the responsibilities of innovators in an organization, for executives, for managers, for innovators, for practitioners. You can define a process for getting that work done. You can actually, importantly, define what are the next rules, what are the laws that govern how we innovate. It's not how we run the existing business, it's how we're going to go about inventing what's next.
How we're going to run the future.
Yeah, and let's get into how we're going to run building the future. Okay. Right? Just like how are we going to go about inventing it? What are the rules that apply there? Those laws need to be enforced, right? It's just we come to an agreement that we get to operate within this special set of rules.
What is good and
but there are rules, right? And there's rules of the game, just like any sport. And then there's a platform you operate on top of. That platform should contain your values, not just tools, right? Not just content, not just knowledge, but a value set that says we've got to live by these. We've got to live by these standards. So I think that's. I hear what you're saying. I'm in violent agreement with you.
Fantastic. One thing that is a trend right now is ChatGPT, and we're talking about values and innovation. And something that has been happening for the last month is a lot of people is taking these tools to improve their own life, but not improving the life of others. We're taking advantage of technology sometimes, of innovation, just thinking about us. And ChatGPT is solving amounts of problems, but just for an ordinary person. We should regulate these things, or we just leave it ahead and see what's going to happen.
In general, I think that you're going to want to have some regulation in place for any technology. Ultimately, you're going to want to. What you don't want to do is start to implement regulations before something has reached a certain level of maturity. So while it's in an experimental mode and happening in an experimental way, you've got to allow some freedom for those experiments to be conducted. But it's the way my father brought me up. He said, as a kid, you're going to have lots of freedom, but when you hit a boundary, you're going to know you hit the boundary, right? And I think right now it's like we're going to set some broad parameters. There's going to be some boundaries, and when you hit them, you're going to know you hit it. But you can do the experimentation, and then as these things become clearer, as we become more certain about what does this mean, what are the implications, then we can start to get more specific in our regulation. If you look at something like Instagram, which I enjoy Instagram, but you think about how damaging that has been for teenage girls, right? The data is there, right? The rates of suicide, the rates of depression, the rates of anxiety, especially for teenage girls, extraordinary.
7 of 10 kids think of suicide now.
Yeah. And this is not, it's not just, there happens to be social media and this rate is increased. These things are highly correlated. We're waiting too late to regulate that, right? We're waiting way too late to step in and say, we've done the scientific analysis of this, we know what's going on, we need to change.
But even when we knew it, no one did anything.
We shall see, right? It's happening too slowly. I do think it's happening. I think that ultimately we will get there. Unfortunately, government bureaucracies move slowly, and these technologies move quickly, and a lot of harm is being caused in the meantime. So I'm kind of giving you a bit of a political answer in a way, which is I think it's not either or. I think it's both. In the early stage, let's be clear about what the boundaries are and that you don't cross those, so that we have room for experimentation. As we become more certain about what is this thing, like let's forget ChatGPT for a second and think about AI for controlling weapon systems. So we do work with the military.
Okay.
The United States Air Force has just done 10 successful test flights of a jet fighter driven by AI, piloted completely by AI. Okay?
Okay.
What does that mean? I don't know. I don't know yet. It's a proof of a technology, but what are the application areas for that, and how do we regulate that? What if I'm a general? How do I make decisions when I deploy a system like that?
Of course.
Right.
But that's why we have to think wrong to build in the best way.
Well, so think wrong. The think wrong methodology can be used for good or bad. We would say there's wrong.
Okay.
So in our country, I'd say that, there's the idea is you're on this predictable path, and there are some things both biological, the way our brain works, and cultural, the way that cultures behave, that sort of create a gravitational pull. So we stay stuck in the status quo.
Okay.
So thinking wrong is about how do we trick our brain and our culture into exploring new possibilities, right? Now, how we define a bold path and what our aspirations are, what our intentions are, I could define that bold future as something that had social good, that actually created value and benefit for all of us, or I could be doing it for evil or dark purposes. And I would say, personally, this is just my opinion, we came out of 4 years of politics in the United States where we had a wrong thinker running our country, but he was using it for very dark purposes, like very contrarian thinker. If everybody is going this way, they're contradicting it and going another way. I didn't agree with their politics. I think it's been extraordinarily damaging. So like anything, like any technology, like any methodology, it can be used for good or it can be used for bad.
So that's what we have to push forward that people understand.
And I think we have to promote a set of ideas and ideals and values that are about positive change. And we have an exercise that we run that's called 5 by 5 whys. And 5 whys. It comes out of Toyota's manufacturing process, and looking at the deeper root reason for why we're doing something. 5 by 5 whys looks at what is the value that we're creating for the communities we serve, for the constituents, the stakeholders, for future generations, for the environment, and for society at large. And why are we doing it? And the whole idea there is, are we creating abundant value? Are we creating value for all as opposed to value for me?
Yes,
and that's an orientation, right?
You mentioned Toyota, and the Japanese companies, they think how they're going to develop a business for
future
generations.
Absolutely.
But in our country, we're always thinking how to think fast for us.
Yeah.
regarding the rest of the humanity.
Right.
Why?
Well, it's a short-termism in our capital markets, at least in most capital markets. That's driven by this sort of short-term quarterly pressure to perform. Financial analysts getting on a call with the CFO saying, "So how are you doing this quarter? How are you doing this quarter? How are you doing this quarter?" You can't run innovation that way. Innovation's on a different time frame. And so depending on the portfolio of innovation, if it's an optimized portfolio or a growth portfolio or a renewal reinvention portfolio, you need to be looking at what's our performance expectation and what's the timeline for that. It's not easy. I mean, this is a big reframing and rethinking of how innovation is done, but it's taking the same discipline that businesses and government organizations apply to other things and saying, we're going to get disciplined about this. We're going to get serious about this.
One day in 4 years.
Yeah. And so don't measure what's the return on investment. We'd say, have this concept, don't worry about return on investment. Right now, there's so much uncertainty about the problem and so much uncertainty about the solution. We're going to measure learning from investment. What's the LFI, not the ROI? So it's a different orientation. It says we're in the business and putting a premium on knowledge generation, not short-term wealth creation.
The knowledge is a
knowledge will translate.
Business.
Yeah. And it will translate. You can ask a CEO. You're putting a lot of energy in running now. Who's taking care of next? Right? Because somebody in your organization needs to be inventing next, and next isn't next month or next quarter, right? Next is the Japanese, the next 10 years. Yeah.
So, how can we change things regarding these things? Time, first, money, the second one, and third, ambition.
How do you change ambition? So how do we re-engineer human beings?
But these
I know
are
what you
three
mean.
things in business that we're always thinking.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, if the CFO doesn't give me the numbers that I want,
right?
Yes, the business at the end is not a business.
Yeah.
So how can we manage that through innovation?
Yeah. So we use a formula. It's one that we think about. What's the transformation that we're trying to create? So that's T. What's the transformation we're trying to create? T equals D, level of dissatisfaction with the way things are, times V, our vision, times P, a process. So T equals D times V times P. So what we need to do is say, what's that from to shift we're trying to create? Do we have agreement that that's worth pursuing? And then what are our reasons for being dissatisfied with the way things are? And so can we get the CFO to be dissatisfied with the way things are, right? We can speak to what you might not be dissatisfied with next quarter, but hey, what happens if there's an inflection point and we're out of business because somebody's passed us up, right? So it's like, oh shoot, I should feel a little urgently about that, right? Now, what's my vision for how we're going to stay in front of that, how we're going to avoid that downturn, and what's the process for getting there? So I think a large part of it is learning to speak the language and use the frameworks that those audiences care about, right? A formula, a portfolio. It's like, let's speak the language of the CFO and the CEO, and then use that as an organizing structure for the creative work that needs to happen.
So the innovation process is not just to the creative product part, as well is for the management part.
Absolutely.
But understanding each other.
Understanding each other and being aligned with each other, right? Acting in concert together, right? And both things need to happen. It's not just like there's going to be this camp and this camp. It's like, no, it's one camp. It's just we have different responsibilities. Like somebody's the sheriff, but somebody's the outlaw, somebody's the scout, all right? Somebody's a shepherd who's going to get that stuff to market. So everybody has a role to play in that, but it's getting them to appreciate and speak the same language, use the same frameworks, and then invest in the tools and the systems that they need to get that work done.
Okay, and Greg, one last question.
Yeah, sure.
What can you tell the people who doesn't know how to start innovating? Because sometimes we're afraid to change things. Sometimes we're afraid in our cultures to mention that we dislike something or we're not agreeing, and sometimes we push ourselves down.
Yeah.
What can you say to that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think there's a few questions in there. One is, do Colombians naturally have confidence in their ability to innovate? I don't know. I think what I've heard is it's a very entrepreneurial country, but somehow there's not this self-belief. Yes. And you go outside of Colombia and people admire Colombian entrepreneurialism, but inside Colombia, some self-doubt. That's part that comes with being a Catholic nation, right? You get to be full of self-doubt. And then I think there's this question of do we actually have the knowledge and the skills and the tools that we need to get that work done? And have we found ways to get started and to try and do that? And are we learning how to collaborate and work together and share that experience? So I think that there's a big opportunity here to actually unlock the entrepreneurial and innovation potential of Colombia by skilling up the talent, because they're very talented, very smart, very enthusiastic people here.
Very educated.
Very educated, yeah. And so I think they're ready. They want access to those opportunities, and I think it's creating an environment where there's incentives to do that. Right. That is part of where government can step in. Right. That is part of where companies can step in and say, we want to create incentive structures for entrepreneurs to succeed, because we know that our country thrives and prospers when we do that.
Okay, so Greg, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope we can do it again, but with a beer or...
Yeah, absolutely. Who forgot the beer?
Okay.